Episode number 75. Hi everyone, this is Lori Jill Eisenstadt, IBCLC, the host of All About Breastfeeding, the place where the girls hang out. Today you will hear a repeat of one of my earlier shows. I made another executive decision, and I can do that because I'm the boss of me. And I decided to take off a few days around July 4th. This meant I would not have the ability to release 2 new shows this week. So here I am announcing that today you will hear one of my very early shows where I talk about my first breastfeeding experience and taking a breastfeeding class. I hope you find it informative and humorous. A little shameless plug asking you to join my new Facebook group. All you need to do is a search on Facebook for All About Breastfeeding Community. Click on the button that says join and I will see you in there. On to the show.
Balloons, bazookas, boobies, bosoms, boulders, cans, hooters, knockers, melons, honkers, jugs, rack, tatas, tits, torpedoes, guns, bust, doorknobs, coconuts, and our favorite one, the girls. Welcome to the All About Breastfeeding show, where your host, Lori, highlights mothers just like yourself and goes beyond the surface questions and digs deep so they share not only their joys and happiness in their daily breastfeeding life, but also their pain and struggles and how they worked through them.
Hi everyone, this is Lori Jill Eisenstadt, IBCLC, and I am your host of All About Breastfeeding, the place where the girls hang out. Every host has their own personality, and as you can see, my personality comes shining through with that introduction. I'd love to welcome you to today's episode. My hope is that with every show and every story, you gain a new appreciation for mothers and babies and breastfeeding. You will want to go check out the show notes, which are on the website, for the various resources mentioned in each podcast. We have a great show today. Let's get started. From time to time, I'm going to do a show called Just Lori. And in each show, I'm going to talk about a personal experience that I've had. This first one I thought I would title, My First Breastfeeding Experience. Knowing that I'm a lactation consultant, I frequently get asked the question, what was my first breastfeeding experience like? I'm going to start by going back in time to my first pregnancy, which is where anything I ever learned about breastfeeding really began. My mother formula fed my 4 siblings and I. My sister had 2 kids before me, and she formula fed her babies. I babysat for many babies, toddlers, and young kids, and to my recollection, none of the babies were breastfed. I babysat for families in my local area, and then when I moved away from home, I babysat for the first few years of college. I was the first person out of my peer group to have kids. During this whole time, I never met a mother who was breastfeeding her baby. I certainly never saw anybody who was breastfeeding her baby. So I had no frame of reference, no role model, no information on breastfeeding. And all these years later, I actually cannot even remember how I began to formulate my intent to breastfeed. I have no idea where I first began even reading about it, other than there was one book in the library called The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding. I followed the program given to me during pregnancy. I registered for childbirth and breastfeeding classes in my last trimester. The class was for mothers only, and at the time, I just followed what they told me. I did not even balk about the fact that my husband was not invited. It would definitely be different nowadays, and I never even asked if he could attend. I just figured that's the way that it was, and I didn't question. I only remember a few things and not too many details from that class, but I do remember one very important message that was relayed, and this was that breastfeeding is the norm. I do remember the teacher saying that the breasts, while a sexual organ, have a primary purpose, and that is to feed our babies. I remember the teacher saying this often enough and in several different ways. I definitely got the message, and while there was some poor information shared in that class, I am forever grateful that the message about breastfeeding being normal and my milk was the milk my baby should get resonated, made perfect sense, and I never looked back. But remember, I had said that I had only remembered a few things from that class. The other thing that stands out all these years later is what I now know to be incredibly ridiculous. We were told that we needed to toughen up our nipples. Breastfeeding class was 4 weeks, 1 hour each night. The first class, we were given strict instructions to take a washcloth and spend 5 minutes on each nipple and rub the cloth over the nipple back and forth, back and forth. We were told to do this every night until our baby was born. Oh my goodness. Well, I remember the first night coming home, sitting upright in bed, topless, and doing this nipple rubbing thing. And Alan is like, "What are you doing?" I explained it to him, and he was like, okay. I do remember complaining that first night that it did not feel so comfortable. But like a good little doobie, I followed the instructions anyway. I did so for 2 more nights, and then I said, you know what, forget this. My nipples were becoming increasingly sore, and crazy enough, I had this revelation and was thinking, by the time I have my baby 6 weeks or so from now, I might not have anything left for the baby to feed from, or that my pain level would be sky high that I just wouldn't be able to do it. This nightly routine was causing me to have an awareness of my nipples during the daytime when I never ever thought about my nipples before. At work, I clearly remember feeling like they were on fire. So I stopped this routine, and I'm ashamed to admit it, but I lied to the instructor. When she asked us to raise our hands if we spent 10 minutes a night toughening up our nipples, I raised my hand along with everyone else in the class. I did not have the nerve to say anything. I also spent the next several weeks of my pregnancy feeling guilty and worried. I thought, toughening them up is hurting so much, I just can't continue. But what will happen if breastfeeding doesn't work out? Will I blame myself because I didn't spend time toughening up my nipples? Oh, the things that make us lose sleep at night. Okay, well, let's fast forward to Alicia's birth, which I would love to give you more details about that, but right now we're talking about breastfeeding. So I can talk about that later if you let me know that's what you want. For right now, I'm going to get back to the breastfeeding. Shortly after Alicia was born, she was taken away from me because they said she had swallowed a lot of amniotic fluid. So they wanted to run tests. They also said that during my labor, the doctor saw something that was concerning about her heart, and she would need to have some tests. I was totally unprepared for this. They assured me that this was nothing big to be concerned about, just something they wanted to check. I do have to say that after hearing this, the first 24 hours were a blur to me, and there are pieces of my memory missing as to the exact timeline. And don't ask me to have Alan refresh my memory because he doesn't remember either. When I am with a mother during a lactation consult, I have to ask a lot of questions, and some of them are about her birth experience. If there are parts or whole chunks that she doesn't remember, some mothers cry about this and feel embarrassed. I so empathize with other mothers, and I do my absolute best to help them understand that this does happen sometimes, particularly if the birth was traumatic, they were given difficult news, they were on pain medication. There's lots of reasons why this can all be a blur. I do know that I kept insisting to see Alicia and to have her back in my room. At some point, they let Alan go to the nursery while she was there before I could breastfeed. They wanted to give her formula. I do remember putting up a fight, and their concession was to give her some sugar water as she needed the hydration, at least they said. I could not bear to feed her the bottle, so Alan did. There we were in the nursery. They stood over and watched as Alan put the nipple in her mouth, and thank goodness they walked away as they busied themselves with something else. Alicia kind of fussed with the nipple in her mouth, and I quickly decided she did not want it. I did not want them to think she didn't drink anything, though, so I remember tipping the bottle upside down, and I let some spill onto my hospital gown. As I think back to that time, I feel badly that I didn't know any better. I felt badly that I just didn't refuse, and yet I could already see that rebel coming out in me as I showed them the bottle and how much she drank. At some point, amniotic fluid was not an issue, and her heart was deemed normal, and she was able to stay in my room until we were discharged. This was a big deal at the time. That first night, I was so tired, and she just cried and cried and cried, and I felt awful. I wish I remembered the name of her nurse who came into the room and held my hand while I cried. She told me that I could do this. Don't worry, I have this. It just takes some time to learn. But you know what? At no time did anyone sit by my side and help me latch my baby on. That's what I needed. Somehow, I muddled through this, and none of it was easy or enjoyable. Alicia was born on June 27th, and our wedding anniversary was on the 28th. And I remember Alan bringing me flowers, and we went home on the 29th. As the days went on, my nipples became increasingly sore. They cracked. They bled. Truth be told, breastfeeding was a chore. This may sound stupid to the next person, but like it or not, I was motivated by two things. I was stubborn, and I did not want to be a quitter. And there were those times when the pain was a bit less, or when the feeding was over, and she fell asleep at my breast, and she seemed to be so happy and peaceful and full and content. Given all the pain I was in, this might sound weird, but I just fell in love with breastfeeding, and I really wanted this to work. I reached out for help from La Leche League. I sometimes had to wait days for someone to call me back. No voicemail or text at that time. I know I'm dating myself. While the ladies were very nice and comforting, I received no practical or hands-on advice. It was just not available to me. Over several phone calls, all I heard was the same message. Keep going, it'll get better, keep going. It drove me crazy. I remember after one particular phone call, when I hung up, I was so exasperated. I just took the phone and flung it through the air. Again, I know I'm dating myself, but I clearly remember that cord. It was like a bungee cord, boomeranging right back to me and hitting me on my knee. I remember being frightened at the depth of my anger and feeling grateful that Alicia was not near me or the phone. Somehow, I just muddled through all the pain and suffering. Many weeks later, my nipples began to heal, the soreness left, and I began to fully enjoy breastfeeding my baby. What I have come to realize now is that more than likely, the latch was shallow, there were no issues with her tongue or palate, basically just a crappy latch. As she put on weight and her mouth got bigger, she could just naturally hop on board and get further back. However, I did keep a journal, and years later, when I looked at this journal, I cried for this mother, for me, as I had almost forgotten how bad and how painful it was. But there on the pages, it hit me front and center, just how awful those first few weeks were. In the journal, I had written the words, "I love my baby so much, but breastfeeding is so painful, and I just don't know how much longer I can do this, and if I can't keep breastfeeding, I'm going to be very depressed." And the part that really got to me was seeing this smudging of a few words on the paper, and all of a sudden I had total recall. I could see myself sitting there, writing in this journal, my tears flowing and dripping onto the page, and me wiping my tears away. As I read this, I really did cry again, tears for that young mother who was me. It's not easy sharing this story. It brings me back to a dark and vulnerable place. As always, I would love to get some feedback on this and other stories that I share. If you would like to leave a comment in your own voice, you can go to my website, allaboutbreastfeeding.biz, and on the right side of the page, you will see a picture of a microphone. Click this on and talk into the recorder, and I will play your feedback on another episode. If for some reason this lovely technology doesn't work, you can always go to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/contact me, and you could fill in an email to me. Thanks so much for listening. I am sure my memory has faded some, and I have left out some of the fun and interesting details about my first breastfeeding experience. I would love to encourage all moms to begin a diary if you have not done so already. Write down all of these memorable moments, as believe me, they will begin to fade along with the years. Even if you don't think that you care now, you may very well have wished in the future that you did write down all the trials and tribulations of pregnancy, birth, and new mothering. So go ahead and do a little journaling. Until the next show, bye-bye.